A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If you're able to hear me out perfectly well, kindly confirm the same. Thank you. So I hope we are still active enough and we have the strength to carry on in the session as well. This is going to be the last session of the weekend. And overall, I understand that this has been a very long weekend overall. We have started from the portion of the interior and slowly and steadily we have moved our way through. But understand that in the portion of the weekend, the advantage that you get is that you are able to look at the larger perspective at one go. And that is an advantage you don't get in the weekday sessions in itself. So here, for example, we will be able to complete the entirety of the portion of geomorphology in one go. And then eventually also understand that it trains your body for the mains examination as well. Because for the mains examination, what is very, very important is also the conditioning of your mind to be able to concentrate for a long duration. So let's take it in a positive perspective from there. So here we start with the portion of gradation, and there we begin with the aspect of the river movement or the agents of gradation as we refer to. We'll start with the action of the river water, running water in general, and running water talks about the action of rivers and streams. Okay, and these end up creating landforms which are also referred to as fluvial landforms. Fluvial landforms. Okay. Now here we start with the basic of the river movement, the basic processes involved when you talk about the river movement in general. So what is the basic principle involved here? In almost all the situations, in almost all the cases, you will come across a scenario where the river originates from a portion which is slightly at an uphill or at an elevation, and then it continues to drain furthermore. Right? So it is present at a kind of an uphill, at an elevation. Now there, as the river tends to originate, it tends to flow quite significantly. It maintains its flow, and then it carries on and drains into a water body or an ocean or a sea thereby. This is the kind of a motion exhibited by every river almost. Now here, in the initial stages and depending upon the flow of the river, you can divide the river movement or the stages of the river into three categories. The initial category, so here in the first stage, which is also referred to as the upper course of the river movement, there you will observe that river moves down the slope. Now when the river moves down the slope, that is also what is referred to as the youthful stage. So upper course or stage 1 is the youthful stage. Okay. Now generally when you think about youthful stage, what are the perceptions that come to your mind? Full of energy, no patience at all, right? Will move in any direction, whichever is possible, wherever you show the direction, they will move. So that is a characteristic associated with that. So in the youthful stage of the river flow, you will come across a scenario where speed is very high. Now, when the speed is very high, that basically also means that the carrying capacity, the erosional power, the erosive power in general will also be very high. For any agent of gradation, for that matter, it will be very similar. When the speed is high, speed is very high, that means carrying capacity will also be very high. Carrying capacity of what? Carrying capacity of the various materials that it can erode. So carrying capacity will also be very high. When the speed lowers down, then the river won't be able to carry those many materials. In the youthful stage, you will find that as the river is hurtling down the slope with an incredible speed, whatever rocks, boulders, pieces of various debris, anything which lies in the way, river will be able to carry it along with it. But in the plains, if you have looked at the movement of the river, they won't be able to carry anything and everything. So the carrying capacity reduces. So that is why for all agents of nature, we can always get an idea that carrying capacity is directly proportional to the speed. If the speed is high, it will be able to carry more. Also, when speed is high, when speed is greater, even if, let's say, the glacial movement or the wind movement or the sea wave, anything which is moving with an incredible speed, greater erosion. Greater erosion. Okay, very little deposition. Little deposition. And when the speed reduces quite significantly and the speed becomes very, very low, that basically means what? Total deposition, because the carrying capacity is very low. So total deposition, negligible erosion. Okay, that is a phenomena you will observe across all the various agents of gradation that we come across. So here in the youthful stage, the speed is high. So the amount of erosion carried out will also be very high. Erosion is high. The amount of materials carried will also be high. Now they will be moving down the slope. Now imagine a river is moving down the slope with an incredible speed. They will be able to carry out vertical erosion. The channel will get deeper and deeper, right? So horizontally in the mountains, you will not find the river to be very wide. The rivers are narrow, they are deep, but they are very swift. So here you will find vertical erosion. Vertical down cutting or erosion. Now, this is basically, also we can write carrying capacity. Capacity is high. Then after that, when we come to the second stage, that is the middle course of the river, in the second stage. So this is where the river becomes or is said to have entered into the mature phase. Now, generally, when you gain maturity in your life, even though it is a different matter altogether that even an 8-year-old kid will tell you that I am much more mature. 10-year-old kid will tell you that I am much more mature. So maturity is also very subjective, but generally maturity brings about a control in energy as well. You are able to control your energy. The amount of energy reduces. You know, you have a particular kind of a path and you follow that path significantly regularly, right? That is generally the aspect associated. So that is the mature stage. Mature stage. So in this, speed reduces. Speed reduces. Now, when the speed reduces, it brings about deposition. So deposition is initiated. deposition occurs. But at the same time, you will also observe the conditionalities where you have horizontal widening of the river. As soon as the river enters the plain region, you will observe basically that the river starts becoming wider and significantly much more wider. So here that leads to horizontal erosion, and that brings about channel widening. Okay, the channel starts becoming broader in significant proportion. Now here, erosion is less. Erosion is lesser in comparison. This is where you will find that rather than in the hilly areas, in the mountainous areas, you will observe that the river will always follow a kind of a straight line path, and largely designated by the slope, largely designated by the valley region. Wherever the valley is, there only the river will flow. But in the case of the plain areas, you will observe that the river is unable to flow in a straight path. River will take various different meandering paths, and wavy nature of the flow will be observed because it is trying to find a flow. Think about it, that let's say in your own house, wherever you have, let's say, a flat kind of a floor portion, in that flat portion, if you pour some water, water will never follow a straight path. It will try to find its path, it will meander, it will form a wavy nature. But if there is a slope in your house, wherever it is, if you pour water, straight away it will flow down the slope. So that is very much reflected in the path of the river flow as well. Then we come to the third stage, which is also referred to as the old stage. Associate it with the old stage of humans also. When you have the old stage which is reached, generally you will find that people, they do not have any interest in outside events, what is happening, whatever is going on in their life, that is also too much to handle. So that is where the same case you can put in the case of rivers also. So here they are not interested in erosion anymore. Whatever they have been carrying, whatever baggage that they have been carrying, they will drop it off before meeting the sea. So here, basically, speed is very less. Very less. No erosion. And deposition is dominant. Okay. This is a feature that you can generally associate with whenever you talk about the river flow in any particular region. Any river will have the youthful, mature, and the old stage generally associated with it. Now, these movements, they will also end up creating various landforms in the process. If you observe the landforms created by the running water, such as river, the landforms are quite different, quite varied. Erosional landforms, if you observe, valleys, gorges, potholes, plunge pools, incised meanders or entrenched meanders, river terraces, they are created. And depositional landforms, alluvial fans, deltas, floodplains, natural levees, meanders, oxbow lakes, and braided channels. All of this are created as a result of this. Now here, as you can imagine, majority of the erosional landforms that you observe, majority of them are created in the youthful stage. Other than these two, all of these are created in the youthful stage. Okay? They are created in the youthful stage. Because why? Because when we talk about the youthful stage, observe that in the youthful stage, the speed is high. So they would be eroding everything, right? that is where they would be significantly having a greater speed. They would be eroding everything. Then majority of the depositional features you will find that it is present in late mature or old stage. Mature or old stage. Because the speed reduces, so they will start depositing materials. Now here, we will take a look at each one of them in detail. At least the visualization aspect is something we will concentrate upon, that how do these landforms they appear to look like. Now, before that, certain fundamentals, for example, I hope we are aware about the English meaning of meander. Meander is something which has got a wavy pattern, right? So you meander down the pathway because you have a lot of time to kill. So meander is when, due to lack of speed, there is a kind of a river movement is somewhat like this. Now, meanders are observed to be formed in the late mature stage or sometimes even in the old stage. But in mature and late mature stage, you'll find the formation of these meanders in general. Okay? With that basic, let us initiate the discussion for the erosional and depositional landforms. When we talk about erosional landforms, we start with the valleys and the gorges. First of all, how do they look like? So observe this particular region. Observe this area. This is what is referred to as a valley. And this particular portion section that you see with a sharp drop, this is what is referred to as a gorge. It is not George, it is gorge. Okay? Many of the times when I interact with the candidates, I get so very confused about what they are trying to ask, because they will say, but Georges are not found there. And you don't know whether they are referring to some individual George or what is it. So it is gorge, it is not a George. Okay, now these gorges, they have very steep walls, very steep walls. They are formed as a result of vertical down cutting, which has been created by a river action. So here, the definition of it. So valleys are depressed areas of land scoured and washed out by the forces of gravity, water, and ice, and they take a form of a U or a V. Generally, in the case of a valley, you will find the erosional structure is somewhat like this. Whereas in the case of a gorge, you'll find they are deep, narrow, in a kind of an I-shaped depression, and it is here that the river will be moving through. And the river would have reached here by the vertical down cutting. Now, it will have steep sides usually formed by a river or stream cutting through the hard rock. Now, the difference between a valley and a gorge is, generally you will come across a scenario that valley has got broader base. The base is significantly broader. Base is broader. Whereas in the case of a gorge, the base is narrow and steep walls. So walls have a gradual slope. And here in the case of a gorge, you'll find narrow base and also you'll find steep walls. To the sides. Okay, that is a common feature or phenomena that you will come across. Now, generally, you come across a scenario where initially a gorge is created. Over a period of time, you will observe that this gorge can also get converted into a valley, right? So generally, over a period of time, this gorge can get created into a valley. It will not look as beautiful as the image, but it can resemble the same shape at least. So how does that happen? So it is a mixture of various different activities taking place. For example, here when we talk about the vertical erosion which leads to the formation of a gorge, This is what leads to the formation of a gorge in general. So here you will find that the vertical erosion has led to the deepening of the structure. This becomes significantly deeper with very steep walls. Now the weathering activities will be initiated on the sides of the walls. This will be pulverized and broken into many small particles, many smaller materials. And this pulverization or breaking of the materials eventually would mean these materials would drain there. Right. So as a result of that, eventually what you come across, observe here, this is the river movement. If you can observe this image carefully, the river is only following a small path. Rest of these areas, these are nothing but deposits which have come down these mountains. So that is how eventually mass movement, weathering, etc., they will lead to a widening of the slope as well. So this is how eventually a gorge can lead to a valley formation. Majority of the rivers which drain through the Himalayan regions, you'll find that they end up creating very deep gorges as they cut through the Himalayas. For example, when you take the case of Indus, now river Indus carves out a gorge while it crosses the while it crosses the Himalayan mountains, in a sense that the height that it cuts through, that is close to around 5,000 meters. When you have the river Brahmaputra, when river Brahmaputra makes a sudden southward bend from across the region of Namcha Barwa in the portion to the north of Arunachal Pradesh, there you will find that from the nearby heights, the depth of the gorge is around 7,000 meters. So all of these, they carve out very deep. Himalayan rivers, they carve out very deep gorges because obviously they are coming down the mountains. They have very high speed associated with them. So the amount of vertical down cutting that they can carry, that is also tremendously high. Now we come to the portion of potholes and plunge pools. So we start with potholes. Okay. Now, how are these potholes formed? So these are your potholes. In order to look at this, you don't need to go to the Himalayas. Walk into the streets of your neighborhood. In the roads also, we have managed to create a lot of these potholes. Some of these potholes on the roads are so large enough that even the Himalayan rivers shall be put to shame that what are we doing? These humans are creating larger potholes than all of us. So these potholes basically are created because of the erosional action and the high speed of the river. Now, in the youthful stage, generally you will observe that the river is able to carry a lot of debris, lot of rock parts, etc. along with it. So imagine a situation if, let's say, this is the riverbed and this is the flow of the river on top of it. Let us assume this is the flow of the river associated. Now here, this river, as it is moving with an incredible speed, it will be able to carry out large rocky boulders, large rock pieces along with it. Now these rock pieces, they will hit the ground, right? They will hit the ground. When they hit the ground with an incredible force, the riverbed will have some kind of an indentation, some kind of a crack or some kind of a depression formed. Then this will roll over, again hit the ground somewhere else. Meanwhile, the other boulder which is being carried out, that will also be pulled towards this region. It will also hit the ground here because there's already a depression there. So that will lead to a kind of a repeated activities, and repeated hitting at that same place will end up creating these kinds of potholes. Okay, so these are created by the mechanical brute force of these rocks and boulders when they hit the ground surface. It is that mechanical pressure which is applied. So potholes are circular depressions formed because of the stream erosion aided by the abrasion of the rock fragments. Abrasion, they hit, move on, hit and move on. Once a small and shallow depression forms, Pebbles and boulders, they get collected in those depressions, they get rotated due to the river action, and that is when, consequently, you'll find that the potholes, they keep on increasing their size. They keep on getting deeper as well. They keep on getting bigger as well. So these are your general potholes. Okay. Now, then we come to plunge pools. Plunge pools, generally again observed in the youthful stage of the river, are formed at the base of a waterfall. Now here, formation of a waterfall is not relevant for general studies, so we'll not go there. But generally, when you observe a kind of a waterfall-like structure, this is the kind of a rock. And here, the river drains in that area, falls in this region, water accumulates and then tends to flow. Now here, you'll find that continuously, the river will drain in this region itself. The river would be falling in this region as well. Now, continuous falling of the river in this area would mean what? It would mean that this region starts getting deeper. It will get eroded in this area. It will keep on getting deeper as it moves. And here, that will carry out a vertical erosion because of the river which is falling down vertically. So this is what is referred to as a plunge pool. Okay, that is what is referred to as a kind of a plunge pool. That is why it is always advisable never to go at the base of the waterfall. Generally, when we are very, very adventurous in our lives, we do want to directly go at the base of the waterfalls. And if we had our own way, we could stop the waterfall as well. So, but then obviously, that is something which is absolutely prohibited in many of the areas where regulated tourism is observed. But in our country, we don't have that kind of a regulation of tourism. So people, you will find, they oftentimes they are not satisfied just by visiting the waterfall. They want to stand directly beneath where the water is falling, so that you can have nice images, nice pictures clicked, etc., and you can have your own kind of bravado. But here you have to understand why it is prohibited, why it is not allowed, is because here suddenly the water level gets very deep. You might be standing 1 centimeter or 2 centimeter, or let's say 15-20 centimeter before a plunge pool. Water might come to your knee height. But as you enter the plunge pool area, suddenly you will find that the water level moves beyond your head as well. And there, it is very difficult for the individuals to come up, because consistently the force of water pushes you down. And that leads to the sad demise of many of the individuals in this area, in these regions. Every year, a lot of people, they lose their lives in these plunge pools across the entirety of the world. So that is the aspect of plunge pools that you associate with. Then after that, here, this again is formed when and where it is formed in the youthful stage of the river movement. Okay. Then we come across incised meanders. Incised means something which has been cut. Incised meanders. How do they look like? This is what an incised meander appears to look like. Observe here that the river is moving in a kind of a meandering shape, right? And all around it, you have mighty tall structures. Now, meanders are generally observed in which particular part of the river? In which stage of the river? Meanders are when the river flows like this in a wavy pattern. So when will the meanders be formed? In the mature stage, late mature stage sometimes, when the speed is less. So if the speed is so less, if we are talking about mature and late mature stage, then how come is it able to create that kind of an erosion in the landform in this region. So these kind of incised meanders, they are created in the mature stage of the river action whenever you come across a scenario where, let's say, the land has uplifted. So this is formed, let's suppose, if you have a river movement which is happening across this area. Let's suppose a river is moving happily, merrily in this area, forming the various incised meanders and so on. Now, here, in the meanwhile, there is an aperogenic force acting in this section. In this particular section, let's suppose there is an aperogenic force which is acting, meaning there is a slow uplift process. Now, upliftment process is very slow. Upliftment processes, they are not very fast. They are very, very slow. In fact, we have talked about it. Maybe it will rise by 1 centimeter every 2 years. That means maybe every month it might rise by, let's say, 1 millimeter, or not even that, half a millimeter maybe. Right? Now, as the land starts to rise, it will rise across this particular region as well, across the riverbeds also. There also it will start to rise, isn't it? As the land in this portion starts to rise due to endogenic force. So in that entire portion, the land will rise. Here, let us say endogenic force resulting in very slow rise of land. We have talked about that rise and fall of land. That comes under which part of endogenic force? The vertical rise and submergence or subsidence of land comes under which part of endogenic force? Let me know. We have talked about the various different forces which act upon the Earth's surface. Now, plate tectonic is as a result of orogenic in general. Okay, which part of endogenic forces? We have talked about it that endogenic forces are classified into two types. You have the sudden forces. We have talked about it that endogenic forces are of two types. Understand the question first before you are writing the residual heat and all these portions. Understand the question. We have talked about the fact that endogenic forces, they act in different ways. You have the sudden forces, you have the slow forces, right? Now that leads to, now sudden forces are earthquakes, volcanoes. Slow forces, they can lead to compression, tension, contraction, expansion, etc. Now there you have the vertical rise, vertical force, and vertical subsidence as well. And that is what is referred to as diastrophism. And under diastrophism, we had studied that you have two kinds of forces, which is aperogenic and another is orogenic. Aperogenic deals with the rise and fall. Have we forgotten everything in the, or is the mind not working? By this point of time, is the mind shutting down? Feel free to let me know about it. Okay, we cannot end up forgetting this that we have studied only a few moments back. So diastrophism is classified into aperogenic forces and orogenic forces. Okay, we have talked about this in greater detail. Okay, we have 2 more hours to go, guys. So kindly keep your mind active. If the mind is not working, we'll take a break. But the portions that we are going to cover here, please don't have the expectation that in the final moments mind was not working, so next week can repeat the entire process. We are not going to do that. That is why we are moving so slow. So here, when we talk about the aperogenic forces, a kind of diastrophism which acts, Now there, it leads to this very slow rise of landmass. Very slow rise of that landmass. Now, as there is a very slow rise of the landmass, here, think about it, what will happen? If we take a look at the cross section of it, let's say this is where the river water is flowing. This is the river channel. Now, the land will rise here. The land will rise here. The land will rise here also, very slowly. But the river is already flowing at a particular height. So whatever rise has been observed here, whatever kind of rise has been observed here, that portion, uplifted portion, will be taken away by the river also, isn't it? So whatever rise is observed, the river will erode it. So that means the river bed will be held at the same height as the surrounding land rises up. As the surrounding areas, they keep on rising up. So that creates a scenario where observe that initially you have the meandering river. As there is an uplift in the surrounding land, the river channel continues to maintain its original height. So that is why it appears as if somebody has cut down the shape of a meander in that region. So incised meander is basically a river meander which has been cut abnormally deep into the landscape because uplift of the land has led to renewed downward erosion by the river, where the river continues to erode its own river channel, any uplift in its river channel, but in the surrounding areas, the uplift is quite significant. So that is where it gives you an appearance as if there has been a significant down cutting which is associated with it, but that is not the scenario, that is not the situation in this case. So this is how you have the formation of an incised meander overall. Okay. Then you also have the formation of what is referred to as a river terrace. When we talk about a river terrace, now this is also basically, no, the depth remains same, Vivek. The depth remains same because if you think about it, this is the same depth at which, or the same level at which the river continues or maintains its flow. So in that entire process, the river will maintain its flow, but the land gets raised up. That is why you have this kind of an erosion which is resulted thereby. Now, river terraces, they are also formed in the mature stage of the river. Also formed in the mature stage of the river action. And these river terraces, if you will observe here, these also are created as the land gets uplifted due to the endogenic forces, due to the endogenic forces. Now, the river maintains its original flow, original level of flow. As the land around it rises. It creates a step-like feature feature across the banks of the river. This is known as river terrace. As river terraces. Okay. So for example, understand this. Suppose you have a kind of a landmass somewhat like this. Now the river is draining on this landmass. The river is moving here. Now it is moving across a plain. So it will never stick to the same path. That same river can, after some time, can move through a path here. It can move to a path here also. So wherever it is moving in that same plane, the river will be eroding that region. That will form a kind of a channelization of the river. Let's suppose before the uplift is happening, the river is following this particular pathway. Let's suppose. And after this, there has been an uplift of landmass. Uplift of landmass means what? The river channel will continue to flow in its original level. So after the uplift, the situation that you come across will be somewhat like this. All around it, the land would have been uplifted. Isn't it? The land would have been uplifted here. And the river would continue to move in this path itself. Now, slowly and steadily, the river will widen its channel, will broaden its flow. So it will erode these areas. Let's suppose it manages to erode these areas. So slowly and steadily, it will create a kind of a landform, which is like this. And the river would be flowing here. It has widened, broadened its path of flow. Then after that, the rise continues. The upliftment continues. Now where the river is moving, river will not, or river will continue to erode that area. Any upliftment which happens in the river channel, it will be able to erode it very easily because the upliftment will be like 1 millimeter. Now 1 millimeter upliftment will be able to be, or the river will be able to erode very easily. So there, after that rise, the landform that you come across, now that will indicate a kind of a pattern somewhat in these lines, where the earlier uplifted portion now observe, this has created a kind of a terrace-like pattern, isn't it? This has created a kind of a terrace-like pattern, and the river will be flowing at the base of it. So this is where the river would continue to flow. So that is what is referred to as a river terrace. Observe this. So this indicates the uplift which would have happened earlier. At one point of time, this position would have been here, where the river would have been flowing. But then subsequently it rose up. Then again another phase of rising. Then again another phase of rising. So by taking a look at these images many of the times, you will be able to decipher how many different phases of rising have happened. For example, if you take a look at the incised meander, just observe the image. You will get an idea by looking at the image that this particular rise portion that you observe, this would have happened in one go, in one stretch. Then slowly and steadily there would have been various phases of rise. That is why you have a creation of a slant structure. Means it would have stayed at that level for a long time for the river to erode like that. Then again observe the vertical wall-like structure. That means again that rise would have happened very suddenly, very steeply, all of a sudden. So that is how, by looking at the image, you can always decipher when that rise has happened and for what duration that rise has happened. So this is the aspect of the erosional structures and landforms created by the river action. Then we have the depositional landforms. Depositional landforms generally observed in the late mature, mature or old stage, other than the alluvial fans. So these are created in mature and old stage. This is the only one which is created in the youthful stage. We'll take a look at the image of all of these. Now, before that, floodplains. When we talk about floodplains, what do we mean by that? So if a river is draining into an area, let's say a river is draining into the region, now the river will be depositing sediments on the sides, right? It will be depositing sediments on the sides. And these deposits will happen in a kind of a plain region. Isn't it? So these are what are referred to as your floodplains. These consist of the silt deposits which are created by the river. And then you also have natural levees. What do we mean by natural levees? So natural levees basically mean what? So here, for example, if ever you would have visited a river channel, or if you would have ever visited a river bank, you would have observed that it is not as if the land is very plain and suddenly you have a river. Generally, you will find that while approaching the river, the land slightly rises up and then it falls into the river. So generally, you will observe that if this is the river channel, now this river carries sediments and silt along with it on a day-to-day basis. Now, it is on the sides of the river when it is flowing. If I ask you, if out of point 1, point 2 and point, let's say 1 and 2 itself, where do you think the speed will be faster, 1 or 2? What do you think? Where do you think the river speed will be faster? At the sides or at the center of the river? Okay. So all those who are saying point 1 and at the side the river is the fastest, clearly you have never been to the central portion of the river. Clearly you have never even imagined what is the flow in the central point of the river. Always the flow is the maximum, the speed is the maximum in the central point of the river. Always understand that. The sides will experience friction from the ground, resistance from the ground. So sides will always have a slower speed. It will be the central portion where the river will be moving at its swiftest best. So many of you, I guess here we have not seen a river in our lives other than the small streams and nalas that flow in our cities. I hope you are not considering that in this case, because in those areas, you will find that in the center we dump the garbage. So that is why the flow is less. In the larger rivers and streams, you will always come across the story that the boat has basically drowned where? In the center of the river, right? That is where the flow is very turbulent, very, very fast. In the sites, nonetheless, I hope that sometime in your busy schedule, in your busy life, you find some time to visit these natural places, rivers, etc. And I hope that your experience to a river is not restricted to newspaper headlines and the images that you see in the book. But basically, when you observe a large river, the speed slows down on the sides. Now, if the speed slows down, what will happen to the carrying capacity? Will the carrying capacity increase, or will the carrying capacity also reduce? What do you think? The speed will slow down, so the carrying capacity will also reduce. When the carrying capacity reduces, then what happens? You have deposition which is initiated. So all the materials which the river has been carrying, that will be, some of those will be deposited here on the sides. And these deposits will create a kind of an elevated structure here. These will create a kind of an elevated structure here. It is these elevated structures that when you approach a river bank, you will observe a slight uplift, and then it leads to the river channel. These are what are referred to as, these are basically deposits by river. And these are what are referred to as natural levees. Okay? So that is what we know as, or what is referred to as, the natural levees in general. Levees, if you have a strong enough natural levee, generally the river doesn't flood, because even if in the rainy season the water increases, the levees will provide that level of protection. That is why when the levee breaks, all hell is let loose. And that is what floods that entire particular region. So much so, even Rolling Stones has written a song about it. Try to listen to it sometimes. So nonetheless, we talk about the basic depositional features created by river. Alluvial fans is the only depositional feature created in the youthful stage of the river. The only depositional feature in the youthful stage. So this is the depositional feature in the youthful stage. Now, how is it created? Basically, you will observe that in the mountains, this is the top view, in the mountains, the river will carry anything and everything that it can. It will be flowing at a very brisk pace. So let's suppose you consider the mountainous regions. Okay, let's suppose. Now, in the mountainous areas, the river will be carrying or moving with a very significant and swift velocity. Now, let's say a river is draining down this particular region. It is coming from here and it is draining down. Now, as long as the river is moving through the hilly and the mountainous region, it will have a very significant speed. But as soon as it enters the plain area, what will happen? The speed will immediately reduce. So that is when, as the speed reduces, it will start depositing materials. All the materials will be deposited, the heavier materials, the rocks, the boulders that it had been carrying, that will be deposited in a fan shape around that river. So, deposition of heavy materials. Deposition of heavy materials. And that is what is referred to as an alluvial fan. That is what is referred to as an alluvial fan, the name. So here, observe, this is an alluvial fan. Now, this is created as a result of deposit. So many of the Himalayan rivers, they form very large fans. Example, if you take the case of River Kosi, River Kosi forms one of the largest alluvial fans in the region, where the alluvial fan has got a radius of close to around 8 kilometers wide. So that is very, very large section of deposits carried out. So this is the only depositional feature in the youthful stage. Then we talk about meanders. So when the river enters the plain area, it is unable to carry out or maintain its speed anymore. So that is where, rather than moving swiftly in a straight line fashion, you'll find that the river takes a curvy, a wavy path here. Okay, so here a meander is an erosional cum depositional feature formed by the river in its mature stage. It is formed when water flows in a curvy, bendy path as a snake. As a river makes its way through an area that is flat, it often develops this kind of a bend pattern. Okay. Now the eroded material is deposited on the other side, on the sides, generally. Okay. Slowly and steadily you will find that the meander starts extending. Okay. We have one question we discussed earlier, that rivers in youthful stage lead to very less deposit. That is why. Okay. Why is alluvial fan so significant in size? So not all the rivers will create an alluvial fan. Only few of them which carry very large amount of sediments. For example, when we talk about River Kosi, now River Kosi is a combination of 7 different streams which come hurtling down the mountains. So all of them will carry their own sedimentary load, and all that sedimentary load, the not the fine particles or the minute particles are not deposited. You have the boulders, the rocks, which the river won't be able to carry through the plains. They are dumped and deposited there. Do alluvial fan deposits not flow away with high-speed water, Kanak? No, they are deposited on the sides of it. Can they be Himalayan rivers? Which one of them, Jay, can be Himalayan rivers? Vivek, it is a song with the same name, When the Levee Breaks. Alluvial deposit. Alluvial fan, yes. In Himalayan rivers, you find alluvial fans. Yes, that is true, Nitin. So that is basically the aspect of a meander. When you have the speed which slows down quite significantly, that is when it starts to meander. Okay? And this meandering oftentimes leads to the formation of what is referred to as an oxbow lake as well. So for example, let's suppose there's a river which is moving in a kind of a meandering fashion. Let's suppose it is moving in a kind of a meander. Now, as the water is flowing here, the water will tend to erode these portions, and these eroded materials will be deposited here, isn't it? Then again, this portion will be eroded, and this will be deposited here. Then again, this portion will also be eroded. It will be then deposited in this region. Here also erosion will be carried out. Here also erosion will be carried out. Slowly and steadily, what it will lead to a situation is that this portion will intermingle, providing the river with a shortcut path. The river will find a kind of a shortcut path for the flow. Now, why will the river take the long path? So slowly and steadily, more deposits will happen, and this area gets cut off. This particular portion gets cut off. And here, This becomes the new path of the river. So this cut-off portion, which was a part of the river once, but now due to deposits and the river finding a shorter way path itself, this is what is referred to as an oxbow lake. Observe this portion. This would have been a part of the river meander once, but now it has been cut off. So it is a curved lake formed from a horseshoe bend in the river, where the main stream has cut across the narrow end, formed a shortcut, and no longer flows around the loop. So that is what is an oxbow lake. Generally, both meanders and oxbow lakes, they are observed here. This is observed in late mature stage of the river flow. River flow. Okay, that is where it is observed. Okay, Avni, listen to this carefully again. When we talk about oxbow lakes, how are they created overall? Listen to this portion. Again, I will repeat this portion carefully. Listen to it. So when we have a river flow, so oxbow lakes are always formed where there is an existing meander, always formed across an existing meander. Formed across an existing meander. Now here, let's suppose you have a river which is moving like this. Let's suppose this is the path of the river. Now here, as the river water will move, general dynamics of fluid movement, if you apply here, this water will move with a greater velocity here. It will try to erode the materials across this side. It will not be eroding materials from this side because here deposition will be carried out, speed is slower. The water will be pushing here also, here also, here also. All the eroded materials, they will start getting deposited in this region. Similarly, here also, as the river water is coming around this corner, it will also start eroding the materials. Slowly and steadily, this will form, this will deepen, this will broaden here. Eventually, what will happen? Both these areas, they will get merged. Both these areas, they will get merged. When they get merged, what do you find? The river will have a shortcut path to flow. Water will have a shortcut path to flow. So while the water has got shortcut path to flow, obviously the flow here will reduce drastically. Meanwhile, the earlier actions of the river had deposited materials here, and whatever was eroded from this portion would be deposited here. So after some time, because the water doesn't flow in that region at all, you'll find that this area gets cut off while the river maintains its natural path. And this cut-off portion is an oxbow lake. This is what is an oxbow lake. In significantly rainy season, when the rainwater is very, very high, this river might again reclaim that oxbow lake. But again, during the dry season, it will be an oxbow lake. Is eroded material the reason for shortcut or excess water pressure? Excess water pressure, not only excess water pressure, but whatever little amount of erosion that it has to carry out across, if understand, think about it, this is the meander in general. So this is basically, it will erode here, it will erode here also, it will erode here also. So let's suppose these two meet. Now, why will the river take a longer path now? The river will then follow a straightforward shortcut path. So that means the longer one is not getting the access to water anymore. That is what will form a kind of a lake. Okay? Is that understood now? Okay, good. Oxbow basically is the hump, the kind of the hump shape that you observe. the bow in a thing. Think about it like a horseshoe. Horseshoe, I hope you understand the shape of a horseshoe. This is the shape of a horseshoe. That is what is oxbow. Then we have braided channels. Braided basically is derived from the term braids, right? Braids, multiple different weaving which is done, which is observed. Now, when we talk about braided channels, here you will find in old stage of the river movement, you will come across these braided channels, where if the river is flowing, let's suppose, now that river will carry out its deposits in the river channel itself because the speed is very slow. So here, speed is very slow. So depositions will happen in the pathway itself. Deposition happens in the river channel itself. Isn't it? So you'll find deposits happening all across. In the river channel itself. Around that region, the speed will reduce. So the river will no longer have a very distinct main stream. It will appear, look at all these deposits. All these streams, they are moving or weaving their way through these particular deposits. That is what is a braided channel. If ever you have crossed through, now many of you have not visited a river in your life, so for those of you, I don't have that hope. But if ever you have at least passed through a kind of a road or railway bridge over a river, you would have observed that at the base around the pillar, you will find that there is a significant amount of deposit of sand particles in that region, creating a small kind of an obstacle. The river diverts itself. So whenever the speed will reduce, it will always basically end up depositing materials. And that is the same fundamental which is at play. So multiple such deposits creates in the same river channel, the streams which are interwoven. That is what we refer to as the braided channel. Generally observed in the lower stage, in the old age, where you cannot have any kind of, you cannot distinguish what is the main flow of the river. Okay? Yes. In Gandak less so, but Ganges and Hooghly, you will observe that. And is there any connection between deposition and drying up of rivers based on the pictures shown? Not significantly, but then when the river has got significant amount of flow associated with it, it will continue to flow despite all these deposits, and these deposits shall be submerged. When the flow reduces, that is when only the deposits are prominent. Kajal, meanders. Where does erosion and deposition occur? So in meander, when you think about it, Kajal, when you have a meander, so if let's say this is a meander, see, don't straight away learn what I am trying to say. Think about it, apply your logic that how water flows. Okay, this is not something that is based out of a geographical theory. This is based out of very simple principle of the flow associated with water. So if you have water which is flowing like this, it will attack this particular area. If I mark this as 1 and this as 2, if the water is flowing like this, it will attack 2 or will it attack 1? What do you think? Always it will attack 2. So that is where erosion will be carried out. Now these eroded materials, they will be carried by the river. It will be deposited here. Again, water will flow in this direction. Now water is flowing in this direction. Will it be eroding this place 1 or will it be eroding this place 2? always it will be eroding the place 2 because that is the flow associated. It will attack the portion 2, and that is where suddenly the water is forced to take a bend, so it will erode more. Then again, as it is moving, it will attack this portion here. This will again be eroded. So depositions will happen on the inner bend and erosion will happen always on the outer extremity in the case of a meander. Okay. Now we come across the final depositional feature created by a river during its movement, and that is the formation of a delta. Now, deltas are formed at the junction or the meeting point of the river and the sea. And it is here where the speed is reduced so significantly that whatever finest of the finer particles, the smallest of the smaller particles that the river was carrying, that is also deposited in that region. So that is where, in the case of the delta, you will observe this is the river flow, and this is the sea or the ocean where it is emptying. So all the fine particles, they will be deposited here eventually, because as the river is moving, the seawater will offer a resistance where everything will be dropped as the speed further reduces. So that is where here you will find very fine and fertile sediments, very fertile deposits will be observed in this case. Okay, these are very, very fertile, very significant for farming activities as well. The largest delta in the world is created in the region of Bangladesh and some parts of West Bengal also. That is the Sundarbans Delta, which is created when River Ganga enters into Bangladesh. There it meets with River Brahmaputra, and that creates the largest delta of the world with the name Sundarbans. Okay. Again, a kind of a heartbreaking question. How are deltas and alluvial fans different? My dear friend, when we talk about deltas, deltas are created when the river is meeting the sea. And it is where the speed is almost reduced to zero, finest sediments are deposited. Alluvial fans are created at the base of a mountain, and it is made up of large rocks and boulders. I hope we are not getting confused just by the shape, that if it resembles a shape, it will be similar. If that is the concept, then mountains are also conical in shape. Many times the various different puffs that you get in the market, the eateries, that is also conical in shape. So can we call a kind of a samosa or a patties as a mountain just because they are similar in shape? Obviously not. So please understand, when we talk about alluvial fans, these are created at the base of the rivers, at the base of the mountains in general. Observe here. Here you have the mountains. At the base, here you have the alluvial fans which are created. So it is in the youthful stage. So, okay, these are those kinds of questions which completely puts you off the grid. So here, alluvial fans will be created here in this particular portion. Deltas will be created here. Now, deltas are not always conical in shape or the semicircular shape that we have seen that. Here, when we talk about the deltas, deltas are also different in shape. You can have bird foot delta, where the shape of the delta, if this is the river flow, deltaic deposits you will find is somewhat like this. And this is the region of the sea. This will be your delta. Okay. So deltas are very different. Here the sediment is very, very fine sediments, fertile sediments. It is created in the final stage of the river. Is that something which is understood? Okay. Understand that, and only then say okay. Don't say okay just because you feel the pressure of it. Okay. Alluvial fans, we have landmass, and after delta, we have sea. That is not the only difference, my dear friend. Also, in the case of the alluvial fans, the amount of load carried is very high, larger loads are carried, and by the time that deltas are formed, you have fertile, finer sediments which are created, which are basically deposited. Okay, let's do one thing for your mental sanity as well. I think it will be better if we take a break, wash your face, do whatever you want to do in order to refresh yourself. We'll take a break of 10 minutes and we come back. Okay, 10 minutes should work. I hope 10 minutes will work, right? Take a break, relax a bit. Then again, we will come back. We will finish the portion. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. A confirmation about the audio, please, if you are able to hear me out perfectly well. Thank you. So how much portion that we have covered till now, how much portion has been understood? Be very frank. Okay, how much portion has been understood and how much portion has simply bounced above the head and you have no clue what has went on? Let me see. I won't call out the individual names, but are we able to understand what is being taught, what is being covered? Are we able to imagine that what is happening on the earth's surface? See, right now the purpose is not for you to be able to learn all of it as well. If you have that kind of an expectation that we will study it for the first time, we will be able to learn of all of it also, that is clearly overestimating human mind's capacity. As of now, I can understand, I can imagine the predicament of sitting in front of a screen, listening to it passively. Oftentimes, you will doze off. Oftentimes, and especially on a Sunday where after lunch, everything starts to appear blur. If I ask you right now, what is seafloor spreading? Probably you will recount what is continental drift. That is absolutely normal. But the portions that you have covered, do you have that level of confidence that if I look at it again, I will be able to recall it? Okay. So that should be there, right? It should not be that immediately everything you will be able to recall. It should be the effort of the sessions are, and all the efforts that you are also putting, we are also putting, everyone, the effort is that the next time when you open up the book, I hope you open up the copy or the book or the notes or the PPT or the ARM, whatever it is. Whenever you open it up, it should make sense. It should not appear absolutely alien to you. That alluvial fan, I know about ceiling fan. What is he talking about? Alluvial fan. So that kind of a predicament should not happen. Okay. Rashi, how to learn, and any questions that you have in the meantime, don't hesitate, ask the question. Please understand, you have embarked upon a journey to clear this examination, and it is your prerogative to understand each and everything very clearly, very carefully. And it is our prerogative to help you understand that in the best possible manner as it is. So any portion which is not understood, feel absolutely free to ask. Okay, do not hesitate. You have my mail ID as well. I'm sure you have my mail ID as well. Feel free to write a mail, right? Reach out to me. I am still in contact with many of the candidates, many of the students who have attended the class a lot earlier. So absolutely feel no hesitation in understanding that or in asking a question about that. Okay. So how to learn and how to remember what is important and what is not for prelims and mains. That will come. First of all, cover the entire syllabus. Cover the syllabus. Once you are able to cover the syllabus, then when you analyze the PYQs, you will get a better understanding that in your second revision that how and which areas are important. As of now, initial portion or initial effort for any subject should be the basic coverage of the syllabus. Okay, I'll write my mail ID. So, and while I'm handing out my mail ID, I should set the expectations very clearly. It should not be that if you are writing a mail to me right now, please don't expect a reply to it by the end of the day. We have many different works, etc., which has to be taken care of. Many mails are cleared on a daily basis. On a daily basis, at least on a personal level, I ensure that I reply to at least 30 of the student queries. So it might take a couple of days to get your reply. Don't worry. If the reply has not reached you in 48 hours, send over a reminder. Okay. However, we take notes in every classes. Okay. So notes basically, when you try to write or when you try to create a note making is something which you develop over a period of time. And note making, when you are writing a note for any particular topic, write the gist of it, the brief of it. If you recall, yesterday morning, the first thing that we did, or I gave you a template for how to make notes for the portion of continental drift. The entire portion of continental drift was put into one portion. Obviously, after the entire weekend, the various different portions that we have covered, you cannot have the note making to be done in 15 minutes. It will take some time for you also to digest it, and then to think about it, that what were the important points and so on. So take that amount of time and then write the notes. Okay. You will get that, Vivek, you will find that in the annotations of the PPT of yesterday. Look at the first slide of annotation. You'll find the example of note making. The second slide, we have given the or we have talked about the detail of how to go about answer writing in geography. Everything we have discussed. Look at the annotations. You will get an idea. Okay. Mains question till the portion completed. Jay, we will handle the mains question today itself. And you will get a clue about. So yesterday also we discussed few of the mains questions. Today we will be handling the rest of the mains questions which have appeared from here. When should we start writing? Before how many months is it preferable? As soon as possible, my dear friend. Writing does not necessarily mean answer writing. The biggest obstacle that you face in your answer writing are, first of all, lack of content. And that lack of content can either come because of lack of understanding, or you know something, you don't know how to write it up. So let's say you are reading something, right? You are reading a particular book, or you are reading a particular chapter, you are reading a particular newspaper article. Now, whatever you have understood out of it, that is something, try to write it up in your own words, in 50 words, 30 words, 100 words. Try to write it in your own words. So putting pen to paper is very important, so that you have a kind of a recall in your brain, and the brain to muscle memory, that is also very important. In the name of note making, many of the candidates, what they do is they will open up the book on one side and they will start writing on the other side. They will spend hours and the mind is somewhere else. They are simply copying. So don't become a photocopy machine. Think about it, what you have studied, close the book, close all the sources, and then try to write it in your own words. When you write it down, that is when you realize that you have not understood why a particular event has happened. Then revisit the particular book, look at the content again, and then close it up, and then try to recreate that writing. Okay? So that is something which should be done. And immediately you should begin it. Right now, I understand that the knowledge level is low, so we may not be able to recreate good answers. But writing is something that we can always initiate. Okay? And how to read newspaper and how to write in own language. So for newspaper reading, it is very simple. Look at those particular articles which are going to be relevant tomorrow also, day after tomorrow also, and year afterwards also. Never look at the political articles. Never ever start studying the political articles. For your own entertainment, you can study. If you have enough time, you can read. But what someone else has said about some other political party, not at all going to be asked. UPSC is never going to ask you a question that what was the quarterly growth rate in 2021. That is something UPSC is not going to ask you. So never hanker down on these temporary data pointers. Look at the larger trends in international news, in economy, in the national headlines. Those larger trends should be caught. Okay. Strategy for prelims. First of all, I would always suggest to you, humble suggestion. You are free to follow your own strategy, but a humble suggestion, if you ask me, always have your preparation with an orientation to the mains examination. That should be completed at least 3 to 4 months before the prelims, including the optional portion. And then in the final portions of the prelims, or in the final leg, revise these topics multiple times. Ideally, before entering the exam hall for prelims, you should have revised the current affairs magazines at least 5 times, the portion of any subject at least 2 to 3 times, and you should have tried multiple different test series or multiple different test papers rather. So we have 20 different tests in the test series for GS. So there 20 tests means how much? 2000 questions. Each of them have 4 options, means how much? You have close to around 8,000 options which are given. Each of them are a source of information to you. Write it down, note it down, any new point that you come across. That is how you arm yourself with so much amount of information and restrict your sources of information so that you can revise multiple times. Okay? I hope that is clear. Now, we initiate the discussion for the landforms developed in the underground by the action of the water itself. Now, this landform which is developed, this landform is developed by the chemical action of water. This is developed by the chemical action of water. So where will it occur? In which portion will it occur? It will always occur, it will always be observed in those areas where the rocks which are found in the ground level rocks, let's say, they are made up of those materials which are soluble in water. So this will be observed in those regions, those areas where the rocks consist of materials soluble in water. For example, limestone. Limestone. Now, limestone consists of calcium carbonate in very large quantities, and that calcium is soluble in water. So if, let's say, you have significant amount of rainfall or a kind of a small stream, wherever it will get a pocket of limestone, it will start dissolving the materials there itself. It will start drilling the materials there itself, and thereby end up creating large underground caverns, large underground caves, and so on. So that is again an action of water creating landforms underneath. Now they can be erosional, they can be depositional. Overall, they end up creating huge type of landforms, very large landforms in general. And this kind of a topography is also what is referred to as karst topography. This is what is referred to as karst topography. What is karst? Why it is referred to as karst topography? Because for the first time when this was discovered, these kinds of landforms were discovered, it was in the karst region of Yugoslavia, the erstwhile country of Yugoslavia. That is why the name karst topography. Here you will find the erosional landforms in the form of sinkholes and also various caves which are created underground. Now, these are created by the action of the water. Water keeps on eroding these areas. And then depositional landforms in the form of stalactites and stalagmites. These are very picturesque, very visually appealing as well. Now, let us take a look at each one of them. When we talk about a sinkhole, this is what a sinkhole appears to be. Don't confuse it with a pothole. Potholes are much smaller. You'll find multiple potholes in the riverbed. But when you talk about these sinkholes, these are, imagine the size of it, this section that you see, this is a roadway. This is a highway of sorts. So imagine the size that it has. It has got very huge size. So basically, if you observe the formation of a sinkhole, in any particular region which is rich, let's say in limestone or certain kinds, such kinds of materials, you will end up finding that significant amount of rainfall, water flow, etc., all of that, what it does is it starts dissolving the materials. slowly and steadily the materials, they start getting dissolved. And that is when the entire region simply collapses. Okay, and you have creation of a large sinkhole. So observe, this is how initially the erosional action is carried out, and eventually you have the formation of these large sinkholes. Now, continuous erosional action can also result in these sinkholes joining together, forming a large depression of altogether. Now, that is what leads to a formation of a kind of a valley sink, which is also what is referred to as uvalas. So, valley sinks are also sometimes created in the process. Okay, and these are created when multiple sinkholes, they get together. Now, erosional structure, when you have the materials getting dissolved in this, so the erosional structure is also created in the form of large caves. The water will flow in this, it will continue to erode, and here eventually the water will drain out, right? So in the process it ends up creating very large caves, and these caves oftentimes extend for multiple kilometers altogether. 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, they will go underground, and one cave will then connect it to the other cave where erosion would have happened. And that is why these caves are very dangerous, especially if you ever happen to visit the region of Mausinram, Cherrapunji. Absolutely very good places to visit. Now there you have many of these limestone formations and limestone rocks. There you will observe that you have the existence of such cave-like features, significant cave-like features. Earlier, many people would be lost in that region, never to be found again, because you enter the cave, you don't know the exit, because each of the cave will bifurcate, trifurcate, and all of them will then channelize again. You don't know whether it has an exit or not. So people get lost in that for perpetuity. So that is where now you will find that the government has closed off these caves for the tourists. A few years back, you had a situation in Thailand where you had multiple school kids who entered these caves, and then the level of water increased due to rainfall, and all of them were stranded. And it took an international rescue operation with trained divers and so on to extract those kids one by one. So these caves again are created by this chemical erosion or the chemical weathering of these rocks, which are soluble in water. Uvalas, Vivek, they are valley sinks where you have multiple sinkholes when they get together, when they merge together because of erosional structure and because of the process of erosion. That is what leads to formation of uvalas. Observe here, you have these two individual sinkholes, they are getting together. Eventually, if the level of erosion is carried out, this entire portion might end up becoming one large sink section, and that will be referred to as an uvala or a valley sink. Okay. Now, when we take a look at the depositional features created, what are the depositional features created here? So the depositional features created are very simple. So they are, for example, if ever you have lived in a particular government house, or you have worked in a government office, you have lived in an older house, you would observe that the seepage happens during heavy rainfall. From the ceiling, it starts seeping. Now, there you will observe that it is not as if immediately it will open up like a tap water. Initially, a drop is formed. A drop starts hanging from top. After some time, you will observe that this drop becomes large enough, it falls down. But sometimes what will happen is that this drop, which also consists of the dissolved materials that it has carried on, this droplet will evaporate. Now, when the droplet evaporates, it leaves behind everything that it was carrying. because after evaporation, the salts are not evaporated, only the liquid is evaporated. So it leaves the salts behind. And now the next droplet will be formed here. It might also evaporate, leaving the salts behind. Now these salts are made up of calcium, right? After all, the rocks are rich in calcium. Now calcium has got a binding property, it sticks together. So that is where you will find overhanging structures, very significantly large overhanging structures from the surface or from the roof, right? Similarly, sometimes what you will observe that these drops, they will fall on the ground. Now, when they fall on the ground, they might evaporate from there. But once they evaporate, they will leave the salt behind. Again, another drop falls on it, it will also evaporate, leaving the salt behind. So that again tends to accumulate. It tends to accumulate. These are like standing structures. So this is what is referred to as stalactites. Yes, very similar to the structure that you see in your freezer, but then obviously that is made out of water, but almost the same process. Here it is made up of calcium. So this is stalagmite. Stalagmite. Now, sometimes what will happen is that in a portion, stalactites and stalagmites, they are created in the same region. And eventually, they might merge. And that creates what is referred to as a pillar. Okay, or a column as it is referred to. Now these are created as a result of deposition of these salts. Hence they are depositional feature. Okay, then the landforms created by glaciers. Now glaciers, one of the most massive force of nature that you will ever come across. Now how stalagmite is created? Okay, stalagmite, see, how is it that this stalagmite on the base is created? Let's suppose you have a roof of a cave from where the drops, they start to fall. Let's say the drop has fallen here. Okay. Now this drop of water will consist of the dissolved salts that it has brought about, isn't it? Which are the dissolved salts? Calcium. The water might evaporate from here. When the water evaporates, it will leave behind that calcium. The next drop will fall. It will also evaporate slowly and steadily. What do you have? A kind of a platform for the salts which have been left behind by the evaporated water. This will continue to accumulate. And that is how you have the stalagmites. Okay. Now we come to glaciers. Glaciers were the most massive forces or agents of nature. And these come down the slope ever so slowly, aided by the gravitational pull. These are your glaciers. Observe this. This is the famous glacier at the base of Everest, right? This is what is also referred to as the Khumbu region, the Khumbu icefall. This is the portion of Everest very close to the base camp. But believe it or not, it claims the maximum amount of casualties every year. Other than the death zone which is present at the top portion of the Everest, other than that, this claims a lot of casualties. In order to understand the scale of it, the magnitude of this, these small portions that you see on closer appearance, this is what it looks like. These are two adult individuals. So imagine what is the scale of this movement, what is the scale of ice which is moving. So glaciers are massive bodies of slowly moving ice, very, very massive. Glaciers form on land and they are made up of fallen snow that gets compressed into ice over many centuries. They move slowly downward from the pull of gravity. Okay, and these glaciers, regardless of how much I tell you, unless and until you visit them, now each of these individual small things that you see, each of these are as high as 4 to 5 story buildings. Imagine all of that is moving very slowly. It creates a very loud kind of sound, very slow kind of a sound. It is kind of a daunting sound nonetheless, very scary sound nonetheless, when there is a rapid glacial advance. But the movement is very slow. The movement is around 1 centimeter per day, or maybe even, let's say, 2 centimeters in a month, like that. Very slow movement. And eventually they will melt, and then they will flow as streams of water. Okay. Now, these glaciers, while they are moving, they will also have enormous erosive power, because obviously you can think about the scale and the size of it, the weight that they will impose. They will have a very strong kind of erosional power associated. So, and that unique kind of erosional structures that they can end up creating, no other agent of nature has got enough power to create that. Okay, that is the uh, immense amount of power that they have. And they will pulverize the material, crush the material that they are carrying into very small sediment form, which is what is referred to as glacial till. And this is what are deposited. Okay, these are very tiny sediments or deposits created by glaciers. Very tiny deposits. So here we'll take a look at the erosional and depositional landforms. Are icebergs created from glaciers? Not always. No, icebergs oftentimes, sometimes you will find that in the portion of Antarctica, few of the glaciers, they will have some chunk which goes off, but no. Majority of the icebergs that you find or you come across, majority of these icebergs are a resultant of a part of that ice sheet or a part of that entire frozen portion that simply breaks off and melts away. That is what forms the icebergs in general. Okay. Now, the glacial landforms which are created are very, very unique. Observe here, this is the glacial movement. This is the glacial movement. These are the glacial movements. Okay. Now, these glacial movements, if you will observe, here you will come across a scenario that they are eroding the materials. At the same time, they will be depositing these materials wherever the speed of movement is slower. They will be depositing those materials. These deposits will be on the sides as well. Observe here, these deposits. Now, these deposits that are carried out by the glacier, these are what are also referred to as moraines. These are what are referred to as moraines. Now you have different types of moraines. You have, for example, the deposits carried out on the sides. That is what is referred to as a lateral moraine. The one which is carried out in the middle, that is the medial moraine. The one which is carried out at the end of the glacier, that is the terminal moraine. So you have the naming of the moraines done based upon where they are deposited. So for example, this deposit will be referred to as lateral moraine. This will be your medial moraine. Now, these moraines will be made up of very fine particles. The particles which would have been eroded by the glacier, and owing to the weight of the glacier, they would have been crushed into very small pieces. That is what leads to these deposits. Let us take a look at few of the erosional structures and look at the scale and the magnitude of erosion, unlike what we have seen, anything that we have seen till now. So observe this particular mountain. This mountain chain, if you are able to observe with the marker on your screen, I hope you are able to see this. It appears as if somebody has scooped out the mountain from one side. It is a kind of a large amphitheater-like structure which is created. And this is a result of the glacial erosion. At one point of time in the geological history of this place, you would have had the movement of glacier happening from this area. And that glacier would have drained from this region, moved from this region, and flowed down here. So this amphitheater-like eroded structure, where the entire mountain almost is scooped up, that is what is a cirque. Now imagine if there would have been a glacier on the other side as well. On both sides of the mountain, if you would have had the glacier. Many regions have that. For example, if we take the case of Nanda Devi, both sides have a glacier. Even in the case of Everest, you have both sides have a glacier, right? So in Nanda Devi, on one side, you have the glacier which leads to the formation of Nandakini River. Other side, you have a glacier which leads to the formation of the Pindar Ganga River. So many of these mountains are such that you have multiple different glaciers. So if the glacier exists from both sides, here erosion will happen here also, erosion will happen here also. You will be left behind with a very narrow, sharp, ridge-like structure. And that is what is referred to as an arete. Not arites, not arete, it is arete. So that is what you have as the creation of an arete. Then after that, imagine a situation where the glacier has eroded the peak from all sides. You are left behind with a single conical standing structure. And that is what is referred to as a horn. So this is what is referred to as a horn. Okay, it is the remnant when the glacier has carried out its erosion from all sides. Then these are your depositional moraines overall. Observe that when you have the depositions being carried out on the sides, these are your lateral moraines. When the depositions are carried out in between the glacier, as we saw earlier, these are your medial moraines. And the deposits carried out at the end when it starts to melt, that is what is end moraine. Okay, so these are basically carried out by the glacial movement themselves. Then we have the drumlins. When we talk about the drumlins, these are basically hills of sediment formation, generally a quarter a mile or more in length, that have been streamlined by glacier flow. Thus, they are often elongated because they are streamlined by the glacial flow. Now here, observe this. This is your typical drumlin. Observe the kind of flow that it has. It has got a kind of a unique shape associated with it. So how is it created? So imagine if a glacier is moving in a region. Let's suppose this is a glacier which is moving in a region. Now, as the glacier is moving, let's suppose there is a slow speed in some region where it starts depositing some material. Now, this will offer an obstruction. More materials will be deposited here. Slowly and steadily, more materials are deposited. Now, when more materials are deposited, eventually what will happen? This will be compressed by the weight of the glacier, and if the direction of flow is like this, it will gain a streamline in that direction itself. So that is where eventually you have this kind of a shape owing to the shape of the glacial flow. Observe this shape. That means at one point of time, the glacier would have moved in this direction. So this is a drumlin. Oftentimes, these drumlins, they occur in large batches, in very large numbers. So you will observe from top view, if you take a look at it, if you observe a view from top, you will come across a scenario where the entire landscape will be dotted by these drumlins. And that is why this kind of landscape is what is also referred to as the basket of eggs topography. This is what is also referred to as basket of eggs topography. Okay, so very quickly, a recap of what do we mean by drumlins. So drumlins are the depositions created by the glacial flow in the plain areas. So when, let's say, during the last ice age, when the glaciers would have moved across the northern Europe and the northern portion of North America in the plain areas, now as they are moving, if the speed reduces, what do you experience? Wherever speed will reduce, the carrying capacity will also reduce quite substantially. Now, let's say the speed reduces, it deposits something. Now, this deposit will offer an obstruction for the more materials which are being carried out. So, those materials will be accumulated furthermore in this region. All this accumulation will happen, right? In this particular portion, only more accumulation will happen. But all the meanwhile, the glacier is moving in this direction. So the deposits also will be crushed and moved in that direction. So that is where the deposits, they take a kind of a streamlined shape and they appear in a manner like this, adhering to the direction of the glacier flow. This is a typical drumlin that you will come across. Okay, so they often occur together in fields, some with as many as several thousand individuals. Okay, is this understood? Why can't the glacier crush the initial obstacle? So the glacier can crush the initial obstacle as well, but sometimes it happens. See, you are imagining a glacier moving down the mountain. Glaciers also sometimes move across a very shallow gradient, especially in the region around Greenland, in the region around Antarctica, etc. During the ice age in the region of northern and western Europe. Actually, drumlins are not to be found in India. Very rare cases which show the evidence of ancient glacial activity. But drumlins are found where? Western Europe, North America, where during the ice age, the glaciers would be moving across the plain region as well. Now, as the glaciers are moving across a plain region, now their speed will reduce. Now, the speed will reduce means automatically whatever glacial till that they are carrying, they will be deposited, right? And that is where the deposits eventually will become so substantial that it will be streamlined in the direction of the glacial flow. Okay, so it is not the initial obstacle always which leads to that kind of a deposition. It is many of the times a resultant of the slower speed as well. But if, let's say, the ground has got a feature like this and the glacier is moving, while the glacier will pulverize this if it has speed, but if it has slow speed, then in that situation, it will start depositing here itself. And slowly the deposits will increase and you will have a drumlin. Okay? I hope that is understood. Glacial till are very fine sediments, very fine particles which are carried out by the glacier after it has basically eroded the portions or the larger rock pieces. Those larger rock pieces, they are then converted or they are then broken into many smaller particles. That is your glacial till. Like in the case of rivers, you have the silt which is carried out. In the case of glacier, you have the glacial till which is carried out. Then we have the eskers. Now, eskers are again glacial deposits, but they are carried out in a kind of a longitudinal fashion, straight line fashion, right? So here, eskers are ridges made of sand and gravel, deposited by glacial melt water flowing through the tunnels within and underneath the glaciers. So as the glacier moves, at the lower portion of the glacier, the upper portion is frozen, the lower portion, due to the weight, some portion melts, and that is where that water will also deposit significantly in longitudinal fashion. In the case of drumlins, it is deposited in heaps. In the case of eskers, it is deposited in a longitudinal fashion. Okay, these are also very fertile, typically found in the region of Western Europe and North America. Okay, now wind. Wind also creates various different activities or various different types of landforms. We'll take a look, we'll do one thing, we'll take a look at all of these in the next session. But before that, let us take few of the questions. Okay, let's take few of the questions here. So, cirques, arêtes, horns, and drumlins represent which type of topography? This kind of a question is asked. So, this is as simple as anything. So, we'll not launch a poll for this. This is the glacial landform. Okay. Now, variations in length of daytime and nighttime from season to season, they are due to Earth's rotation on its axis, Earth's revolution around the sun in an elliptical manner, longitudinal or latitudinal position of the place, revolution of the Earth on a tilted axis. Which of these are responsible for variation in the length of daytime and nighttime? Correct. Very good. So length of day and night, they vary. Why? Because of different level of exposure to the sun, and that is because of the revolution or movement on a tilted axis. Now taking a look at few of the main PYQs. Explain the formation of thousands of islands in Indonesian and Philippines archipelago. Now here, in this particular question, what do you have to write? Very simple. The requirement is for you to be able to explain oceanic convergence. So in the introduction, you write that the Indonesian and Philippine archipelago, they are basically constituted with thousands of islands. Many of them are volcanic in origin. Now, the formation of these can be very easily explained with the help of plate tectonics theory. That will be your brief introduction. Then in the portion of the body, this is for 10 marks, 150 words. Then in the body portion, initiate by describing that in this particular area, you have various different types of convergences which take place. For example, you have oceanic convergences in between Pacific plate and Philippine plate. Also, Pacific plate and Caroline plate. Also, you have the oceanic portion, oceanic crust of Indian plate with Sunda plate. Then draw the rough image, rough diagram, rough map of that area, and also draw the sketch of the convergence of ocean talk about the formation of the trenches, volcanic eruption, and how island is created. Now that is the requirement of this question. Then a longer question. This is for 250 words, 15 marks. So here, why are the world's fold mountain systems located along the margins of continents? Okay, bring out the association between global distribution of fold mountains and earthquakes and volcanoes. So it is a two-part question. So always, as we discussed yesterday in the introduction for a two-part question, always the introduction should consist of the address to the first part of the question itself. So in the introduction, talk about fold mountain. What is a fold mountain? Fold mountain is a mountainous system formed due to compression of the continental landscape, which leads to an accumulation and formation of a fold thereby. So here, what is a fold mountain? Fold mountain. Now, on the margins of the continents, so which mountains will you indicate here? Here, you will be indicating Atlas, Rockies, Andes, Appalachian. These are the mountains that you will indicate in the rough map of the world. Map is required. Yes, correct, Avni. Cascade as well. Okay, map is required. A rough map is required to indicate the presence. Now, why are they located at the margins? So there you have to talk about in the body portion, you have to talk about folding process. Why folding happens. Okay, now folding happens when you have a convergence. Okay, in this case, all these convergences that you will indicate, all these convergences other than the Appalachians, all the convergences indicate oceanic continental convergence. So talk about the convergence of the land masses as well, and how sometimes even that can be used as, or that can also lead to formation of fold mountains like Alps, like Himalayas, that you can give in the body portion. Then you come to the second portion of the answer. Bring out the association between the global distribution of the fold mountains. So again, the global distribution of the fold mountains will be indicated in the map. So always advisable to draw the map in between your answer, right? So that the attention of the evaluator is taken to the map. Now there, talk about the fact that wherever you have the fold mountains, earthquakes are a common phenomena in all of them. Indicate those areas, why earthquakes are a common phenomena, write about it. And then after that, in which of these fold mountains you experience volcanic events. So you experience volcanic events in Rockies, Andes. That is where volcanic events are observed. Okay? Then define mantle plume and explain its role in plate tectonics. 10 marks, 150 words. Right? We have given you the definition in the slide itself, in the PPT itself. So in the introduction, talk about what do we mean by mantle plume. Is mantle plume. Okay, that is something you will simply write in the introduction very briefly. Then in the body portion, talk about how the plume is formed. How the plume is created. Okay, the source of heat. Okay, then after that, draw the diagram. rough diagram. Okay. After that, the impact on plate tectonics. Plate movement. Here, talk about the aspect of the movement of the plates, right? How? Because generation of convection current. Of convection current. Okay. Draw a rough diagram of that as well. Okay. Then elaborate what kind of movement will be initiated by the convection current, and that is how you can finish your answer. Then after that, discuss the geophysical characteristics of circum-Pacific zone. So in the introduction here, this is again 10 marks. 10 marks, 150 words. So circum-Pacific zone in the introduction, right? That the region bordering the area of the Pacific Ocean, that is what is regarded as the Pacific circum-Pacific zone. This is an area which is dotted with very frequent seismic activities and very frequent volcanic eruption. That is why it is also what is referred to as the Pacific Ring of Fire. That will be your intro. Then after that, in the body, now this particular region around the Pacific Ocean, that is dotted with various different geophysical phenomena and events, namely the formation of various landforms and also events such as sudden forces such as earthquakes and volcanoes. Draw the diagram then. After that, draw the diagram or the rough sketch of the circum-Pacific zone. Only the circum-Pacific zone. No need to draw India. Just because you know the map of India does not mean you draw the map of India here. Only the circum-Pacific zone here. And there indicate that what kind of convergences happen. So that happens because of oceanic convergence. So with a diagram, another diagram indicate convergence. Right? Oceanic as well as oceanic continental. Talk about the fact that Pacific plate is subducting from all different sides, and that is what gives rise to volcanic peaks and eruptions. Give the example of volcanic peaks that we have taken all around the vicinity. Give the example of the trenches which are formed, which we have looked at. Give the example of the seismic events. All that justify with the examples, and your answer is done. Okay? That is what is the questions. What are the questions which have been asked from this area? You also had a question, what is volcanic hotspot? That is also something which is asked, but it is also a direct question. I'm sure you'll be able to answer. Do we need to explain via diagram? Always. But diagrams are not always self-explanatory. They are just a tool for helping you to explain. Okay? So that will be all from my side today and in this weekend. Next weekend, when we meet, we will initiate from the portion of climatology, and that is when we will proceed further. I hope that this weekend session, even though it was long enough for many of you, I hope that when you revise it, this is much more clearer. I hope this has added some value. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself. If you get time, do revise and relax. That is most important. So till that point of time, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Have a good night. Thank you.